Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. So this week, myself and GameZone, with the help of a few of our friends, completed Gauntlet 6 for over 100 players on our server. So we're going to be talking through strategy and what builds we used for this. Let's go.
So firstly, I'd like to mention the boss that we all struggled with the most was Ricia. So through the majority of Gauntlet runs that we did, this is the only boss that I died on, and sometimes that was multiple times. So this video is actually a clip from where I died more than once from her attacks, and I'm going to talk you through why that was. So one thing that we did go in with, part of our strategy, was saying to the players that are under combat rating to not use their revives. So if they go down in the first 3 bosses, we told them just to stay down, don't use your revive, and we'll revive you at the end. What this does, this means that they go into the last 2 bosses with 2 team revives and 5 self revives. So this will really help, because if one of the heavy hitters or support players goes down, they'll be able to just revive and hopefully then revive their teammates, or just basically be hitting the boss with some damage. Now, one thing that did work for us, as you can see here, is Bone Wall being used to block Ricia's attacks. That meant that when you're being controlled by those growths and you're stuck in that area where she's hitting with her attacks, Bone Wall actually completely blocks all of her attacks hitting you. So that is one thing that worked really well for us. Another thing that we did go in with was 2 Necromancers on our team. So for our boosting team, we made sure we had 2 DPS players and 2 Necromancers to give shields and bone armor. In this video here, you can see I actually have 3 Necromancers on my team, and part of the reason for that is because GameZone swapped to Necromancer to complete Gauntlet, simply because there was a few occasions where none of our Necro friends were online to help. Now, this is going to be the first point in the raid that I die, and you can see it's because I don't have anyone around me that can give the bone wall to block Ricia's attacks from hitting me here. So I've got my shield on, but unfortunately I was hit way too many times for it to actually protect me. Now, another thing that I did is I went in with ice armor as well as having the bone armor from Necromancers. This just gave me a little bit more survivability, because at points like this where I'd gone down, I was able to use my ice armor to protect myself as soon as I revived, and to also then go and revive other teammates. I'm now going to hand over to GameZone so he can talk you through the build he used for Necromancer and why this worked in Gauntlet 6.
This build evolved around providing survivability, buff to party, and counter for Ricia spikes, and to kill final boss Flower simultaneously. Starting with Paragon Tree, I am using Weaver. For primary attack, Soulfire is the choice here, with Bite Fator, which gives me 19% increased damage on the Soulfire because of Awakened slot. First skill I have here is Skeleton Mate, using it with Dark Magnus, and this is the only essence that I have assigned with this skill. My second skill is the Command Skeleton, and I am using 3 essence for it. The helm that I am using is the Skeleton Archer, although I would suggest to use Storm Rider, which I do not have right now. The main hand for Skeleton that I am using is when Command Skeleton die, they grant nearby 38% increased attack speed for 3 seconds, and they die quite often in raids, so this is actually a good one for you and your party. And the second main hand is again for Command Skeleton, and their damage increased by 19%. The third skill I'm using is the Bone Armor, and in my opinion it is the most essential one to provide buffs and survivability. To make sure that the uptime of Bone Armor is 100%, you need to at least use 2 pieces of V2 so you can get 30% beneficial duration. And having 4 pieces of Shepherd would be a nice choice as well, along with 2 pieces of Shalbaz. Here I am using 4 pieces of Shalbaz and 4 pieces of V2s. Urge, however, these are not optimal in my opinion. For the chest piece of Bone Armor, I am using Ablative Armor, which gives 5 charges of damage immunity. Also with the Pent, it is offering 14% critical hit chance to yourself and your party member, whoever received Bone Armor ability from you. For the shoulder, this is another for Bone Armor, which is going to provide you with 28.5% attack speed and also your party member, whoever received bold armor from you. And for the first 3 bosses, I'm using borrowed time, but it is really not necessary. It's up to you what you want to use. However, for the 4th boss, which is Ricia, bone roll is actually essential, and it will help counter the spike attacks from her. So make sure to use this. And for the final boss, I changed my loadout from remote armory and equipped myself with dark curse and use dark rune ends, which helps us kill flowers simultaneously. You all have to do is apply this curse on one flower and focus the damage on that, and it will help kill all of them simultaneously. And that's some of my builds.
Leading on from what GameZone has just said, the flower phases in the Pestial raids are the most imperative to get correct. So by applying the Dark Curse on one flower, it will actually allow you to destroy all of them at the same time. So what we were doing was the Necromancers that were in our raid had Dark Curse. We had 2 of them with Dark Curse, so there was always one available to apply that on the flower. Then what we were doing was we were all focusing on one particular flower. So when we went into the raids, we made sure that if we got the first flower phase, we'd be focusing on the bottom flower. And if we got the second flower phase, we would all focus on the bottom left flower. This meant that everyone knew exactly where to go and where to attack. And it stopped Pestial going into that shielded phase, because that is the part that you really don't want to happen. That is the part that can make or break you completing Gauntlet 6 basically, and that is one of the reasons why we had so much success with it and why we didn't have any failed attempts despite having run over 25 raids in the last week. So that was another successful raid completed for us, and taking a look at the results here. So myself and GameZone were top for DPS, and then we had Agadea and Jack Harris as our support Necromancers, and Jack Harris was in party 2 with Agadea with myself and GameZone in party 1. Now I did screenshot the different results from Gauntlet because we were testing out different essences throughout just to try and get the most powerful builds that we could for this. So just taking a look here, this is one of the runs where GameZone was Necromancer, and you can see that he was pretty much constantly buffing me with that critical chance because I had a really high damage result in that particular raid compared to when he was Demon Hunter and we weren't having any buffs on a critical chance, so the results were slightly lower, and you can see this for the whole team as well. So now let's take a look at the build that I was using and how and why this worked. As always, starting with the helm, we're using Silver Lining. So with this, Black Hole now devours the power of enemies caught within it, increasing the damage you deal by 28.5% for 6 seconds. Now this does work on bosses with the increased damage, however they don't get caught in it. Rampant and Inscrutable on the chest, so this gives Potent Storm. Lightning Nova now conjures the lightning orb that orbits you, firing lightning bolts at your target when you use your primary attack, with damage increased by 18%. On the shoulder, we're using Crystalline Shadow for Disintegrate, so this now summons an Arcane Deputy that follows you and channels a Disintegrate beam at enemies. Disintegrate damage is increased by 18%, and we've paired this with Hastened Oblivion on the pants. Disintegrate's cooldown is reduced by 1.6 seconds when damaging enemies up to 4.8 seconds, and the damage is increased 10% from the Awakened slot there. On the main hand, I'm using Volatile Arbiter, so Magic Missile explodes every 3 hits, dealing 18,066 damage to surrounding enemies. Damage is increased by 90%, and Magic Missile damage increased 10% from the Awakened slot there as well. I know it's weird to see me not using Rift Carver, but I'll explain why in a second. Hellstone on the offhand, this gives Frost Armor, so charges you with 6 hits of immunity from damage, and cooldown is reduced by 10% from the Awakened slot, as well as a 7.2% from this essence, so that gives you quite good uptime on Ice Armor there. Entropic Edge on the alternate main hand, Disintegrate damage increased 19%, and Blaster Cast on the alternate offhand, Magic Missile fires 2 additional missiles, each dealing 4,343 damage, and the damage is increased by 90%. For green items, we're using 4 pieces of Vitus for that beneficial effect duration and the attack speed on the primary attack for 3 seconds as well. And we're using 4 pieces of Grace here for the continual and channeled damage, so that basically boosts the damage from Disintegrate in this build. And it also gives you that boosted damage by 16,035 when you hit an enemy 5 times. Gems, we're using Bloodstoke Jade, Starfire Shard, Roiling Consequence, Pain Clasp, Viper's Bite, Mother's Lament, Gloom Cask, and also Bottled Hope in this build as well. So not too different to my normal builds other than having Roiling Consequence now. Another thing that I'm using here is the Weaver Paragon tree, and also using the Warband buff for the attacker. Now, one thing I will mention is that if you're not going in as DPS and you're going in just to basically do the raid, an alternate thing that you can use on the chest, an alternate essence that I would suggest going in with, if you don't have high DPS, would be to go in with Halted Breath. So this gives you Ice Armor's duration increased by 30%, and the cooldown is reduced by 3.6%. I find that when I have that paired with Hailstone and with the 4 pieces of Vitus, you basically have 100% uptime on Ice Armor. So if you don't have a Necromancer in your party, or you're worried about dying and you don't have a very strong or high DPS, I would definitely recommend going in with that in your build instead. So lastly, I'm just going to be showing you the test run of this build on a test dummy. So this is just so that you can see the kind of damage you get from it. Now, this build was first posted by Apollyon, and that is why I decided to try it out. And I did test multiple builds through Gauntlet. I didn't have any failed attempts at all, but this was the one that did give me the most damage, which is why I swapped to it. Now, obviously, Reforge bonuses will make a difference to this, so I will just mention that at this point. Apollyon has different Reforge bonuses to what I do. One thing that I did also do with the Gauntlet runs was I swapped to the Restraint stance at the end of each raid, so that when I entered the new raid and approached the boss, I could actually activate the Focus stance. So what this does, this increases your critical hit chance for all skills by 20% for 3 seconds, and then that goes down to 10% after that 3-second time is up. So what that will do is that will give you that increased damage from your skills. So basically approach the boss, hit all of your skills, and it will give you that increased damage. So we're going to test this all out on the dummy now and see exactly what this does and what this looks like in practicality as well, because it's quite hard to see in the actual raid videos. So what I was kind of doing is launching Black Hole and then hitting my other skills. There's pretty much 100% uptime on the Disintegrate here from having that essence on the pants that is obviously reducing the cooldown on that. And this gives quite a lot of damage. You can see at the moment it's over 2 million damage per second. Now this will drop down slightly because obviously with my legendary gems that are active, they're not going to be active for the whole time. A lot of the legendary gems, the cooldown is like 20 seconds, so they might activate 3 times in a minute if you're lucky. But this is why we want to do the sustained damage test, as this is really important to make sure that you're actually giving enough damage over a whole minute period. 10-second bursts are great for testing if you're doing dungeon runs and you want to see how much damage you can actually do in 10 seconds, or for Battleground as well, because obviously those defeats can be quite quick. However, when it comes to things like Gauntlet, you need that sustained damage to actually be able to finish it. So we're coming up to the minute mark here. So we finished on just over 1.9 million damage per second. I would say you want at least 1.7 million damage per second. That is what my other builds were giving me. Anything lower than that, you might struggle as a DPS and you'd be better off going in as a support build. But obviously, problem with Wizard is we don't really have much support that we can give. I really hope they will turn Ice Armor or give Ice Armor an essence at some point that is similar to Parting Gift for Necromancer, so that you can share Ice Armor with your team. But that is pretty much it from me today. I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any more questions about things I was using in the build, just give me a shout in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching and have a great day.